So, our lesson this morning is a question that I'm asking myself and I'm also asking you. And the question is, what is your motivation? I mean, in everything that we actually do, there is a motivation. In fact, let me start by defining this word motivation so that we understand where we are actually going, all of us. I know we all know what motivation is, but that's just one of or two of the dictionary meanings that I have up there about motivation, which is defined as an incentive or a reason for doing something, or it is also defined as something that encourages someone to complete a task regardless of pitfalls. I was thinking, about this. When Alan is visiting, which he has been doing for some years now with his wife, they should be coming again this August. I usually go out with them to the rural areas. Mostly when we are in the rural areas, we will be using our rural home for accommodation for some days. That is if we are having classes around the area. But there are other churches that are a little bit away from our rural homes. So normally we actually use for 2 nights or so, Hotel Hill Hotel in Shishala. There is something over these past few years that I've actually observed with the waiters and the waitresses at this hotel. They obviously now know us whenever we call in there, and perhaps we have gone to their dining for some meals, it's usually the supper. Many of them actually follow each other to actually want to come to serve our table. And I've been asking myself why, and of course the answer is very simple, because Adam is very generous with giving a tip. So he's actually done that for a couple of years now. So many of them now know that if this team is here, if it's going to be for 2 days, the one that is going to be serving the table is actually going to be maybe $40, $60 each every day. So they always want to come and serve our table. In fact, it's interesting to me that they actually come, maybe just call in on the table, maybe 3 or 4 times during the few minutes that you are actually there. Is everything okay? Can we give you the drinks before the meals? Was the meal okay? Something like that. It's actually motivation which actually is motivating them. I actually have a young man, he's not here this morning, predecessor. He actually had his attachment at NRZ. He was doing electrical engineering at some point. So when COVID struck, we know everything came to a standstill. So when everything resolved, he couldn't go back to NRZ because there was no motivation according to him. They were not being given anything. So he actually decided to go to Holiday Inn, under maintenance department at Holiday Inn. So he's supposed to be in work suit because he is actually supposed to be doing electricity and maintaining, everything that is to do with maintenance. But most of the times he would actually go wearing the waiter's uniform instead of the work suit. So whenever there was a gap for him to be able to serve with everybody, he also would serve with them. And obviously the question was motivation. When you are maintaining, you are out there in the maintenance office, nobody sees you. But if you are going to come and serve at the tables, maybe one bourgeoisie is actually going to give you a tip. That's what motivation is all about. It's an incentive that is going to drive you to want to do more, or to want to even go out of your way and do something that ordinarily you would not be doing. The biggest motivator that has ever been known in human history is money. Even if tasks are difficult or a job is dangerous, for money people actually take it up. Think about soldiers. We have had our own soldiers that were at some point deployed outside of the country, DRC at some point, where it was very dangerous, but our soldiers were motivated to go there. Why? Because if I'm able to come back, I will actually be richer, because I would actually be given this, extra money or something like that. They would actually go there. They even enroll now If you go to countries like Syria, countries like Ukraine, where there is actually a war which is raging now, you still see people queuing up to be, to be enrolled as soldiers. Why? If you ask them, it's because it's a form of employment that's going to give them money. Think about these people that are popularly known as hitmen or terrorists. They are people who just employ somebody, because I hate so and so, so just go and hit at him, on my behalf, then I give you money. There are people that actually go and kill somebody on behalf of another, simply because there is money that is involved. Think about terrorism that is going around the world now. I mean, just last year, we had 3 key issues that were associated with terrorism. One which happened in China, the other happened in Germany, the other happened in New York in America. That was classified as terrorism. Somebody just drives, his car into a mob of people and kills people for money, because they actually going to be given. People spy, do spying job for money. Prostitutes do their job or their profession for money. Game rangers, just last year we actually had some who were involved, our own game rangers who were involved in a shootout with some poachers. You are always in danger from the animals, you are in danger from poachers. They of course managed to kill 3 of the poachers. But it could have been these game rangers who could have been killed. Think about people who kidnap other people for money. We actually have this particularly common in Nigeria, where people actually come and they come either even at a school, they actually abduct everyone, then for ransom. They're actually going to start phoning each and everyone whose child has been abducted. If you don't bring such an amount, we are actually not going to release your children. Money has always been known to be the motivator. Let's forget about the negatives. Let's think about the noble jobs, which also are taken up because someone needs to earn. In fact, even education, if you ask every parent why they send their children to school, I guess the answer that they are going to tell you is that I am sending my child to school because I want them to pass. What's important about passing? So that they are going to get a good job. So what? So that they are going to get a decent salary. That's the purpose of education. Otherwise, if people would not be employed after being educated, they would not go to school. So they are going to school because they want money in the end. I mean, at the end of the channel or at the end of the chain, actually there's money to talk about. If there's no money, nobody's going to, I mean, how can you spend all those years being educated for nothing? You actually want money at the end. Education is pursued to the highest qualification for money. People leave their native land. We have seen that happening in Zimbabwe in droves. They have actually gotten out of Zimbabwe, going overseas, either pursuing education or pursuing employment. All this is happening abroad. Why? Because they want to earn money. In fact, it's interesting that I saw this billboard as I was preparing this lesson, where somebody was actually giving an advice which he considers to be the best career advice. And this person says at every job you should either learn or earn. Either is fine, both is better. But if it's neither, then you have to quit. What is the import of what he is saying? The import of what he's saying is that at every job, your motivation should be to learn. So you can go to a job to learn. Those that are on attachment do not necessarily go into a company to earn. They go there to learn what they call on-the-job training. So it's fine, according to his advice, it's fine if you are going to go into a certain organization just to learn, because you are learning how to do the trade. But if you are also going to be able to learn and at the same time to earn, that is better. But if you are not going to get any of these two, then you don't have a business to be there in that company. Why are you there? You can't learn anything new, neither are you earning, so why are you there? There must be something that is motivating you to actually want to come to work for that particular organization. Either you are earning money or you are learning. I would prefer going into a company where I am going to earn a good salary, even though I don't learn anything. But as long as I've got cash at the end of the day, I'm going to be content with that. So money is actually the biggest motivator that has ever known in history. It's money. People are motivated by money. Now, let's go into this question. I'm going to give you a minute of silence. to try and answer personally the questions that I've just put up on board there. There are 3 of them. I'm going to read them out, then I'm going to be silent for about a minute. I want each and every one of us to really think deep about these questions. When you became a Christian, what was your motivation? That's the first question. And the next question says, when you have continued as a Christian and you are willing to keep on, what still is your motivation? Then the last question is, when you come to meetings, to services, to church, like we have done today on a Sunday, what is your motivation? I think my minute is over. I really want us to think deep, because this is exactly where my delivery this morning is coming from. It's actually coming from these questions. When you become a Christian, some of you have been Christians for a couple of decades now. Myself and my wife, this coming September, we are going to be 25 years here as members of Hillside. We were baptized right here in September 2000. So that will be 25 years with us as Christians. This question also is pertinent to us. When we became Christians then, what was our motivation? But another question is, when you have continued, like some of us that have continued for the past 25, some of you have been Christians much, much longer than us. What has motivated you to want to continue remaining as Christians? When you come to services like now, what has motivated you? There are several things that you could have actually done this morning, but you decided to come here. What is motivating you to come here? In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, the writer mentioned some amazing characters. I mean, we have a couple of characters that are mentioned there that I'm not going to look at individually. But of course, there are some that obviously stand out, like Abel, some like Noah, some like Abraham, some like David, and of course we have many, many more. But these of course stand out. They are mentioned in this chapter because the writer is actually saying they are champions of faith. It's actually interesting as you read further in the book of Hebrews, if you go into the next chapter, which is the 12th chapter. The writer actually starts by reminding the reader that as you are surrounded, as we are surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, so he says, the cloud of witnesses that he is talking about are these very characters that he has mentioned in chapter 11. So he is actually saying they are now witnessing against you. It's like when you go to a football match, you actually have the main people that are actually playing the ball themselves, who are called the players. But in football, they always have these other people which they call the 12th men. And by the 12th men, they're actually talking about the spectators or the supporters or the fans, who are actually sitting by the terraces, and they are watching everything happening there. But these are the people that are able to drive their team, which ordinarily should not be able to win, but it can actually go ahead and win. Because the motivation they are giving to the players is such that the players are now prepared to give it all just for the fans. So the writer of the book of Hebrews in chapter 12 is saying, Abel, Noah, David, Sarah, Samson, all the guys that are mentioned there are like those that are actually standing or sitting on the terraces now, and they are watching you and me, who are the current players playing the ball. And they are actually urging you to go, because they are saying, we once were like you, but we conquered. We also want you to be exactly a champion tomorrow. You are a champion, you are the player today, but you don't remain the player. You are also going to join them, and you are going to be one of the witnesses that are actually urging everybody to go. What is your motivation when you come here? I was thinking about these men and women that are mentioned in this chapter 11. And the conclusion that you can actually give about their motivation is, you ask a question and say, what exactly motivated them to do what they did? And of course, the answer that you definitely is going to have is that, number one, they loved the Lord. So if you love the Lord, you are prepared to give it all. You are prepared to do, because the Lord himself was prepared to give it all. In John chapter 3, verse 16, we are told about the eternal love of God that he showed to humankind. And how did he do it? He gave his only begotten Son, that he would die on earth. He would come on earth to die, so that your sins could be forgiven. It's interesting that the passage actually says, so that anyone who believes in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. Later in the book of John chapter 1, somewhere around verse 10, 11, 12, he actually says, those who believe in him, he gave them the right to become the children of God. So the love of God was not shown by lip service. The love of God was actually shown by bringing his only Son on earth to die. So what is the motivation? The motivation of these people, they loved the Lord and they expressed the love. But they also had faith in the Lord. So if they actually feared the Lord, in fact, that's what number 2 says there. And number 3 says they had faith in the Lord. In fact, it's interesting that in verse, in actually verse 6 of Hebrews chapter 11, in chapter 11, we are actually told that without faith we can't please God. So if you are a Christian who is faithless, you are not pleasing God, because God can only be pleased by those who have faith. Without faith, it is impossible, the verse says, to please God. These people pleased God because they had faith. They trusted the Lord and they obeyed the Lord. If you take these 5 attributes and you make them yours, there is no way you are not going to be mentioned among the champions. Of course, the Bible is not going to be rewritten so that there's going to be a chapter that's going to be created for the newer champions of today. But I tell you, you are going to be one of those champions. Because these men and these women had all these attributes and these qualities in them. Let me pick out David out of these men and women that I'm talking about. And David, for instance, he rejoiced to be in the presence of the Lord. This morning, somebody mentioned, as we were making comparisons of David and Hazael. Hazael, when he was told that he was going to be king, he immediately made sure that he killed the incumbent. When David knew and he had already been anointed by Samuel to become king, he let Saul die on his part. He kept on mentioning the statement that I can't touch or I can't kill the anointed. At least on 3 occasions, he got an opportunity to kill Saul, but he said, I'm not going to kill Saul because he is the Lord's anointed. Until Saul died on his own, then David assumed office. This was a unique man, and when we read about him, I've chosen a couple of Psalms. In fact, the book of Psalms is always believed that the majority of the Psalms were written by David. Not all, of course. There is a mistake to think that the book of Psalms was written, or all the Psalms were written by David. That's not possible, because the book of the Psalms, the events that are contained, or the stories that are in the book of Psalms cover a period of almost 1,000 years. David did not live that long. David wrote a part of the Psalms, and other Psalms were written by other people. I have chosen a couple of Psalms that were written by David, and I want us to ponder on these Psalms. I'm going to read out all the Psalms as we are actually asking ourselves, what exactly is my motivation? In Psalms chapter 5, verse 7, David says, but I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. But he says, I will enter your house. When you were talking about the house of God during the time of David, you are essentially talking about the temple. Because at the time, the arrangement was God would be worshipped in the temple. So when David is talking about the house of God, he's actually talking about the temple. So in other words, he's saying, I am going to enter into the temple, and I'm actually going to bow down toward the holy temple, but I'm doing that because I fear you, Lord. In Psalms chapter 23, verse 6, David says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. Not 1 day, not 2 days, not 1 week, not 1 year. David says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is a big statement that David is making. I am going to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David is making a commitment that I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to run away from you. I am always going to be serving you. I'm always going to be obeying you. I'm always going to be fearing you. In Psalms chapter 26, verse 8, David also says, oh Lord, I love the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. I've talked about the house, which essentially would mean the temple of God. So if David is saying, I love the habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells, they knew that the Lord dwells in the temple, because this is where the Ark of the Covenant is. So David actually loves the vicinity and the house of God, because he actually knows that this is where God is. So in other words, he's saying, I don't want to abandon, or I don't want to live away from the Lord. I want to be close to God all the time. In chapter 27 of the book of Psalms, in verse 4, he says, one thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord. But listen again, all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. In chapter 52, verse 7 to 8. Of course, this one, I took it. It was not directly written by David. It was written by him when he was actually running away from Saul. And this is what David says. He says, see the man who would not make God his refuge, but who trusted in the abundance of his riches, and sought refuge in his own destruction. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. You know, this makes me think about one of the great men of the past called Joshua. In Joshua chapter 24, Joshua is nearing the end of his life. So Joshua is going to gather the elders of Israel, and he's going to gather all the people, and he actually called them around him. And Joshua is actually going to remind them about the idols that were being served by their forefathers. By their forefathers, he of course was talking about Abraham and his father Terah, when Abraham was still in Ur of the Chaldeans before he had been called by God. So Joshua actually then ended up by asking them a question and saying, it is incumbent upon you now, whether you want to serve the living God or you want to serve those gods that were being served by your forefathers beyond the river Euphrates. But I read Joshua's conclusion. Joshua actually went ahead and said, but as for me, I am going to serve this living God. As for me and my family, I am going to serve this living God. David is taking from what Joshua was saying, and he is saying, I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and forever. I am like a green olive tree if I'm in the house of God. I'm flourishing if I'm in the house of God. If I'm out, then I can be there because I don't have God with me. Then in chapter 69, verse 9, he says, for zeal of your hearts has consumed me. Then chapter 84, verse 10, this actually was written by the sons of Korah, or it's attributed to the sons of Korah. And they actually say, for a day in your court is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. I want you to see the depth of the meaning of this psalm. For a day in your court is much better than 1,000 days elsewhere. There is nothing that I'm going to enjoy. That's what the writer said. I may spend 1,000 years somewhere, but I don't think I'm actually going to enjoy as much as I am going to enjoy if I get just one opportunity for a single day to spend that time in your house. I would rather be a doorkeeper, the lowest of the professions. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. Let me be the doorkeeper. But lastly, in chapter 122, verse 1, which was actually read to us this morning, this again is David. Listen to what David says. I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Are we glad ourselves to come to the house of the Lord? This gives us another question. When we were absent from services last year, where were we? What was the reason for our absence? David is saying, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. When you were absent for a day, for two, some for a month, some for over a month, where were you? What was the reason for you not to be here? Did we have genuine reasons or we made up reasons? I've seen people who actually do that. When they wake up on a Sunday morning, instead of creating a reason to go to church, they actually create a reason for not going to church. We are unlike David. David would create several reasons for him to go to church, to the temple. There was no church during David's time. He would go to the temple. There is no temple in our time. There is the church of the Lord. Are we glad when they call us to go to the church? When we plan our trips, do we ever consider Sunday? I'll give you this story. In 2008, there was a lot of shortages in the country. All of us know that. All of us who were old enough at the time. So my Mark King, Keith's young brother, and myself traveled a lot across the borders from Zimbabwe to Messina, and we were bringing in things. Particularly, our main line was a green bar washing soap. So we would actually go there, bring some boxes of soap, sell them to the vendors in town, then go back again, bring more, go back again, bring more. But one thing that we were able to do throughout the whole time, and one thing that we had agreed upon, was that we were never going to travel on a Sunday. Because on a Sunday we needed to be here, number one. But number two, one thing that we also made sure we would do was that before we travel, we need to check the South African calendar. Because their public holidays are not always our public holidays. So we needed to make sure that when we go there, we don't get there and discover that it's a public holiday, shops are closed. So we would make sure so that was part of the planning, purpose, the planning of the itinerary. The purpose being that we didn't want to miss a Sunday. My question is, when we plan our trips now, then, do we ever consider a Sunday? If a Sunday is going to come, while I am where I am I going to have a place where I am going to worship with everybody? It's said that many of us have never, taken this into account. But then as Christians, that exactly is one of the things that we need to do. We need to make sure that somebody is going to ask me and say, so are you trying to restrict us? Are you trying to say we should not make trips? My answer is blunt. If the trip is going to interfere with the Sunday, my advice is don't make it. Unless if you really know that where you are going, there is going to be a church. Unless what you are really going for is reasonable enough for you to be absent. This is me, who is actually saying that. I have not missed a service last missed a service during COVID time because everybody could not come. From the time that services were open, I've made sure and I've tried to be at services. Whether it's at Hillside or somewhere, when I'm traveling, I will make sure that I'm not going to miss my Sunday. I'll tell you the reason why we should not make a Sunday. We should not miss a Sunday. Worshiping God is not about me or about you, but it's about Him, that is God. So, His wishes should actually precede my own wishes. I know that it may be very inconvenient to us to worship God. Yes, it may be very inconvenient. But because God requires it from you and from me, we have no option of our own. Whether inconvenience is going to come or not, we still have to worship Him, because that's what He requires. So, let's ask this question again. Let me start by asking myself, what really is my motivation? And then allow you to ask yourself, what really is your motivation? We have noticed that those of the poor who have been mentioned as champions in Hebrews chapter 11, they were mentioned because they loved the Lord. Do we love Him more? Or do we love Him to equal those to be mentioned alongside the champions? They feared the Lord. Do we fear the Lord ourselves? They had faith in the Lord. Do we have faith in Him? They trusted the Lord. Do we trust Him? They obeyed the Lord. Do we obey the Lord? These are three basic things that we should remember. One of them is that we are part of the church, not apart from the church. I want you to understand this carefully. We are part of the church, not apart. We are the church if we are together. We are not the church if we are apart from each other. But the second thing that I also want you to take note of is that the church is water and Christians are the fish. If you think about the relationship between water and fish, if all fish die, water will still continue to exist. It's not affected by the absence of fish. So the church is always going to exist because we are fish. But we can't exist without the church, because the fish cannot exist without the water. So the church is the water and Christians are the fish. Water can do without fish, but fish cannot do without water. But the most important thing that I also want you to remember is that I can't remember the death and the resurrection of Christ alone at war or wherever I am traveling, but I can only be able to do that when I come here and meet with everybody. This is why it is important to come on the first day of the week to meet with everybody. Because earlier on, Brotherhood was presiding over the Lord's Day. In fact, this is the climax of our services, where we are actually saying, number one, I am actually saying, you are my brother, you are my sister in Christ. And so when I'm breaking that bread and I'm drinking that grape juice, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying I am actually breaking this bread and sharing it with you because you are my brother in Christ. But I'm also saying Christ will actually remember your death, which is very important for me in person. I'm not going to be able to do this unless I am here or I am gathering with the like-minded Christians elsewhere. This is why I am saying a Sunday is very important. How can a Christian be absent from services, even for a week, for one Sunday? I think it's clear. What about 2? What about 10? What about 3? Because some of you were absent for all that long. Tell me, how does it really feel on a Sunday when you are not here, when you have not worshipped, and a Sunday comes and it goes without you worshiping? What really happens on you or with you? Don't give me the answer. But I'm saying this to provoke us. I'm saying this. In fact, one other person once said, the problem, he was just talking about Africa in general. So he was saying the problem that we are having in Africa, for Africa to be such a backward continent, even though they are laden with riches, is because African leaders don't annoy each other enough. Whenever they meet for their meetings, they are always praising each other for nothing. So he was saying this is time for them to annoy each other. Because when you annoy me, I become angry. But in my anger, when my anger subsides, I'm going to ask myself and say, but why did he anger me? Maybe this is also the time that we need to be annoying each other more, especially about attending services. If I annoy you enough, you are going to say, but what? I'm angry because of this guy. But then after your anger is subsided, you are going to say, but what exactly was he talking about? After all, he was inviting me to come to church on a Sunday. So he was not wrong after all. We become permanent friends. I just made up this thing here, which actually says rivers never go reverse. So this person is saying, so try to live like a river. Forget your past and focus on the future. Always be positive. Why was I glued to this? Why did I think it was important for me to put it up there for you? Because past is past, bygones are bygones. Whatever happened last year is already happened. You can't undo that. If you were absent in total of 8 weeks, you can't undo that. That has already happened. But now let's wait for the future. From now going forward, let me make sure that I'm here, because I'm supposed to be here. I made a contract, number one, with God. And I actually told God that my membership has been placed with Hillside. Don't give up meeting together. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25 says, as some of you are in the habit of doing. So I should actually be telling myself to say, I don't want to be absent for no apparent reason. You have never been absent at work for no apparent reason. So what is more important, work or coming? I just think these thoughts are actually going to help us as we are planning into 2025. As we are actually asking ourselves the question, what is my motivation to worship God? When I go to church on a Sunday, what really is driving me to want to go to church? If I'm not there at church, do I even miss it? As we move, as we've just started 2025, I thought maybe this could be an appropriate message for us to evaluate ourselves as we move into 2025, as we make resolutions. One of the most important resolutions that we should actually make for ourselves is that I am not going to be away from the service, no matter what, except if I'm incapacitated, mostly by health. All other reasons, let's weigh, are they good enough? I always want to ask myself a question and say, what if Jesus would actually come today and he finds me doing this? Is he going to approve of it? If we ask ourselves that question, that might be motivation enough for us to want to always come and not meet the service. I thank you very much for your time of listening attentively, but I'm still asking the question, what is your motivation going forward into 2020? Thank you so much. Maybe we can actually make this as our theme. Put it up on the board there in our big bold letters. What is our motivation as Hillside as we go into 2025? Thank you so much for your time.